righty. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our Restoring Huichica Creek Flood Protection, Habitat, and Climate Resilience webinar. My name is Monique Byro, and I'm a Community Engagement Project Manager here at Napa RCD. I'll be helping facilitate tonight's webinar and keep us moving through the program. I'm joined by lovely members of our expert project team panel who are going to be available to answer all of your questions at the end of the presentation. Tonight, we'll hear from Aaron Fairbrook, Napa RCD's Forest Health and Restoration Program Manager, and he'll be providing an overview on the project and its goals. And then following the presentation, we'll open the floor for questions and for discussion. So during the webinar, we're going to ask that you please remain muted. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat at any time. I'll be collecting them for the Q&A session at the end. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the Napa RCD website later this week as a resource for anyone who would like to revisit the conversation or share it with others. As a reminder, please drop your name and email in the chat if you can. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Aaron for our presentation.
Thanks, Mo. Good evening, everybody, and thank you again for joining us tonight. My name is Aaron Fairbrook, and I am the Forest Health and Restoration Program Manager at Napa County Resource Conservation District. And tonight, we're going to talk about the Huichica Creek Restoration Project. It's a project focused on flood protection, habitat restoration, and climate resilience in the lower Napa River system. And I'm going to start with some broader context around sea level rise and flooding, and then zoom into Napa and specifically Huichica Creek. I'll also talk about where the project currently stands and some of the challenges and opportunities that we're seeing and ways the community can stay involved as the project moves forward. I also want to emphasize that this project is currently in the planning and design phase, so not construction yet. So a big part of tonight is sharing what we know so far and hearing your ideas and feedback. So let's jump in. So across the world and here in California, we're seeing major changes in how water moves across the landscape. Scientists have projected roughly 1 to 3 feet of sea level rise by the year 2100, and we're already seeing more intense storms and atmospheric rivers. At the same time, we've lost over 90% of historic wetlands in the bay systems. And that matters because wetlands and floodplains naturally store water. So when those systems disappear, flood risks increase for nearby communities and our infrastructure. So this is a global issue. It's not just a Napa issue. Many coastal communities are already struggling with sea level rise and flooding. For example, parts of Indonesia are sinking so rapidly that they are planning to relocate their capital. And in the Maldives, where I would love to go and vacation, many islands sit only a few feet above sea level. So, and at the same time, we're also, wetlands are continue disappearing globally so far by 22%. And those are some of the most important natural systems we have for absorbing the floodwaters and adapting to rising seas. So bringing the story closer to home, we're already seeing these challenges here in the North Bay. Highway 37 is a great example. It's vulnerable to flooding, and it's one reason there's growing interest in restoring wetlands and floodplains around San Pablo Bay, as you can see on the red parcels on this map. We also track flooding closely on the Napa River. The 1986 flood reached over 30 feet, which is the disaster flooding stage, and flooded roughly 20,000 acres. So a lot of destruction. So while sea level rise often sounds like a distant coastal issue. It's directly connected to flooding and resilience planning here in Napa County. This map gives a visual sense of what sea level rise can look like across the Bay Area. The bright green areas represent the low-lying land at or below current high tide levels. So the map on the right shows what happens when there's a 3 foot sea level rise. So lots of land could disappear. This helps illustrate why these low-lying transition zones around San Pablo Bay are becoming increasingly important. So one of the big ideas behind this project is rethinking nature as infrastructure. We often think about infrastructure as roads or levees or pipes and pumps, but wetlands and floodplains also perform critical infrastructure functions. They act like a sponge. They absorb and store water. They slow the flood flows. They reduce downstream flood risk, and they help buffer sea level rise. They improve water quality and provide habitat for fish and wildlife. So there's a lot of benefits. Um, and instead of trying to push away the water as quickly as possible, these systems give water room to spread out and slow down. So we're especially focused on the lower Napa River because this area functions as a climate transition zone. And what I mean by that is just it's where the tidal influence of the San Pablo Bay meets the inland river systems. It's also where the flood pressure tend to concentrate. But importantly, it's one of the few areas where wetlands may still have room to move inland and adapt as the sea levels rise. So as you can see on the map, Huichica Creek sits directly within this transition zone. And we just don't have many places left where nature can still adapt. Huichica Creek is one of those places. So let's dive into it. Huichica Creek. This slide shows the project site and shows how the landscape has changed over time. Historically, Huichica Creek would have been connected to a larger floodplain and wetland system. Water could spread out, it could slow down, soak into the landscape, and just move through the multiple channels, meanders, and wetlands. And over time, the creek was straightened and confined, which, was a common practice back in the day to make the land drier and easier to use for agricultural and development activities. So what we're looking at now for this project is how can we restore some of those lost floodplain and wetland functions while still protecting the infrastructure and neighboring land uses? We started small, as Napa RCD owns a small parcel out there, but it has expanded with neighbor interest. The project is currently about a 70-acre restoration effort, and it involves multiple landowners and partners. The project goals include restoring the tidal wetland, riparian, and floodplain habitat, while also improving climate resilience and reducing the localized flood impacts. Again, we're still in the planning and design phase, and tonight is part of that broader public engagement effort. We're also working closely with design consultants and technical specialists as we study hydrology, habitat conditions, flooding, and restoration opportunities. And like Mo said, they are here tonight, so you can ask some questions at the end of the presentation. Projects like this are really exciting, but they're also complicated. We have existing roads and infrastructure. We have multiple landowners, and areas that already experience flooding. There are also ongoing issues with unauthorized public access and dumping and other activities. Um, at the same time, we're trying to balance the wildlife needs with human use while also planning for future sea level rise. And these types of projects can have complex permits and we are going through the BRIT process, which stands for the Bay Restoration Regulatory Integration Team, where it consolidates all the agencies and the reviews, which can sometimes help fast track the whole process. This picture shows one of our wildlife camera sites. Critters are usually blocked by the black silt fence, and they eventually move to the opening to get through it. And they have to go through the bucket, and we have a camera attached, so it takes a picture when there's movement, so we can learn what lives in this area. And we've seen a snake, we've seen a mice and lizards and newts and all sorts of things. The snake's probably chasing them, but it's kind of neat to see all the wildlife that's in there. And here we're looking at modeled flood depths for the 2-year, 10-year, and 100-year storm events. And the main takeaway is that this landscape already floods. And in larger storm events, water spreads across much of the project area, almost all of it. In fact, some neighbors have to wait for waters to recede before being able to use Duhigg Road for groceries or running errands. There's just so much water. So, but the goal isn't to eliminate the flooding. Flooding is part of how floodplains work, and it's doing its job here. So the goal is to better understand where water goes, where it causes problems, and how restoration design can help keep waters in areas where it provides habitat and floodplain function, while also reducing risk to roads, buildings and other infrastructure. So in other words, we're trying to work with the flooding and not just fight against it. This site is interesting because it has a relatively gentle slope moving inland. And I know that may not sound interesting, but it is. So hear me out. What it means is that wetlands may be able to gradually migrate upslope as sea levels rise instead of simply becoming drowned or squeezed out. So, for example, at the bottom of the picture there of our project site, the railroad sits at a 4-foot elevation. So if sea level rises 3 feet, all the land below it or our sponge of protection could be devoured and just lost by the sea, just flooded, taken out. However, there's potentially more than 500 feet of marsh migration opportunity here as the terrain gradually rises to 20 feet elevation on Duhigg Road. So wetlands and marshes won't completely disappear. They will just relocate inland and still function. And that's increasingly rare around the Bay Area. So that's what makes this site interesting. And it's one reason this site has so much long-term climate adaptation value. Another reason these projects are attractive is because they can provide multiple benefits at the same time. So this project has the potential to reduce the localized flood impacts, improve habitat for fish and wildlife, support groundwater recharge and water quality, and create opportunities for education and stewardship. We also want to recognize the cultural and historical importance of this landscape and are going to continue developing meaningful community and tribal engagement as the project moves forward. A big part of this project is community engagement, and we're working with multiple audiences, including landowners, community members, tribes, recreational users, regulatory agencies, and also funders. And this webinar is one of several engagement opportunities. We'll also use project webpage updates, future workshops, and interactive feedback tools to gather input as the design process continues. We've developed a broader engagement strategy tied to key project milestones. Right now, we're in the data collection and site analysis phase. Later this year, we plan to share conceptual design alternatives and gather more detailed feedback on those options. There will also be future opportunities through open houses, advisory committee meetings, Napa RCD board meetings, and volunteer opportunities. So the important thing to know is that tonight is not the only chance to weigh in on this project. It's the beginning of an ongoing conversation. We do have an advisory committee, and they serve as a forum for stakeholder input and transparent discussion as the project moves forward. They are public meetings, so you are welcome to attend them if you're interested. The committee will help provide feedback on restoration design ideas, public access considerations, and long-term management questions. And their role is advisory, helping inform the planning and design process as we refine the alternatives. And here's the overall project pathway. So right now, step one, the data collection and site analysis, that's where we are right now. That means we're gathering all the information we can about the project site to make good design decisions. So that includes field assessments, ecological studies, hydrology, flooding, site constraints, basically all the existing conditions, as well as gathering community input. The next major step is developing design alternatives. That's where we'll start comparing different restoration approaches and looking at what works best for habitat, flooding, public access, permitting, and long-term management. So this stage is where your input can make a big impact and help us lead us to step three, where we select the preferred design alternative. After that comes permitting and environmental compliance, and then implementation after we find a new funding source and do successful grant writing. And finally, we'll be looking at the long-term monitoring and stewardship. So the main takeaway is that we're still early enough in this process that public and stakeholder input can really shape what comes next. And there's opportunities for input and participation integrated throughout each planning and design step so that we can ensure feedback can meaningfully inform project decisions as they are made. So over the next phase of the project, we'll continue our technical studies and modeling and complete the existing conditions report, which is getting pretty thick, and begin developing restoration design alternatives. We'll also continue expanding the stakeholder and community engagement as we move deeper into the design process. And this is a graphic of just an example of the kinds of restoration ideas we may explore as the project moves forward. One of the big questions is how do we give water more room to slow down, spread out, and reconnect with the floodplain? And that could include things like reconnecting side channels, creating seasonal wetland areas, or restoring tidal marsh habitat, or potentially allowing portions of the creek to meander more naturally again. We're also looking at where floodwaters could safely spread during storm events while still protecting the roads, infrastructure, neighboring landowners, and sensitive areas. So there's a lot of things to juggle, and that's why the planning and design process can take some time. Um, some of the concepts may work better for habitat, some for floodplain function, some may be better for access, and some may not be feasible at all due to permitting or infrastructure constraints, or maybe they are just hard to fund. So that's why this phase is so important. We're still studying the site and collecting the data, evaluating all the alternative designs, and before we make any major decisions. I'm glad you showed up because we also have some homework for you. Please fill out the comment card and share your ideas, concerns, and priorities for the site. I encourage you to subscribe to the Napa RCD newsletter. It can help you stay informed about this project and all the other awesome stuff we're working on. We have education programs, monitoring, volunteer opportunities. We're working on forest health initiatives, And also, we're doing a lot of fish passage projects, so pretty exciting stuff. Um, I also encourage you to visit the project webpage. We will be updating it as milestones are reached. And that's my email address. Feel free to use it. Reach out to me directly if you have any questions or ideas or concerns. Be happy to talk with you. We don't have many places left like this, and Huichica Creek is one of those places. And I repeat this because it's the reason why this project is so important. And projects like this help reduce the flood risk today while also showing what's possible for climate resilience, habitat restoration, and nature-based adaptation here in Napa and beyond. This can be a great demonstration project. So thank you again for joining us tonight. We do have several team members here tonight to help with questions, and here they are. We did have a few questions online that I wanted to answer real quickly before we get into any other questions. One was, are native plants part of the plan? Yes, the goal is to restore the native tidal marsh, riparian, and floodplain habitats using plant communities that are appropriate for the site. So definitely. Um, is there plans for a census of the plants and wildlife at the wetlands? Yes, that is part of our data collection efforts and will be a part of our existing conditions report. Um, a third question was, what opportunities are available for upper watershed restoration work? And upper watershed restoration opportunities include fish passage improvements, riparian restoration, floodplain reconnection, erosion or sediment reduction, forest health projects, and groundwater recharge efforts. I know that's a lot, but it's all kind of connected. Different parts of a watershed serve different functions. So both upstream restoration and lower tidal restoration are important pieces to building that long-term resilience. Um, but I wanted to say too that doing these projects depend highly on landowner willingness and interest. So if you have property out somewhere and you're interested in maybe a project, use my email. I'm happy to come out and take a look and see if we can do something. Um, Also, projects depend on funding as well. Is it going to be competitive enough? So sometimes some projects don't happen. So finally, how does this project benefit the Napa watershed outside of this creek? And so Huichica Creek shares the same tidal environment as the Napa River. So if we restore these wetlands, it will provide habitat that supports fish, birds, and wildlife that use the bigger Bay Area. Um, the restored wetlands will help with water quality because wetlands and marsh filter that sediment and pollutants before reaching the bay. And the wetlands can migrate here. So that will help sustain the larger Bay Area. Climate resilience is a regional challenge. So working on Huichica will complement efforts on the Napa River and also efforts around the San Pablo Bay, like that one map I showed with the red parcels. Um, so hopefully that answers your questions. And I am going to get out of the slideshow. And Mo, do we have some more questions?
Yeah, Erin, if you could actually keep the slideshow up, there is a request to go back to the screen that had everyone's homework. So the comment
Oh,
card piece and the website. And then we do have some other questions. So while you,
Can I just add, Aaron, while you're going just to that final question, how does this potentially impact other parts of the watershed? One
yeah.
other value there of this project specifically to other parts of the watershed is that historically we've used this site for education for our land managers. Historically, we managed this as a research and demonstration vineyard. We've made this transition to restoring it to native habitat. So now it can become this learning space for land managers in different parts of the county or different areas of the Bay Area to learn about restoration, learn about native plants, learn about different techniques around restoration. And this is part of our community engagement process to envision some of these things, of course, how we can better use this space. But the idea is that this can be a teaching space for folks who maybe want to convert a portion of the vineyard into like a healthy riparian zone or a wetland area, or somebody who's just doing work, in their backyard or in the community with a local park, that could maybe utilize some of these techniques. So hopefully that's another benefit.
Thanks for adding that, Lucas. I'm going to kick us off with some of the questions that are in the chat. The first came up when you had the photo up of the wildlife cam. And the question is there an ongoing census of the wildlife at Huichica Creek, or is one planned?
Yeah, Candace, do you want to jump in on this one? Is Candace not
Oh,
here?
we can't hear
Candace, you
you.
might be muted.
Oh,
Shoot. Any better?
there we
We can
go.
hear you
Hey,
now.
all right, all right. Yeah, so we currently have across the project site some wildlife cameras that are set up. So we have started that process on our end as far as the project is concerned. On one area of the project, owned by CDFW, they already have, I think, 3 cameras installed that they have been, I'm not sure how long that they have been doing that, but there has been ongoing wildlife cams set up to track that wildlife. So, in the process over time, we will hopefully have the opportunity to compile that information. And I'm excited to see, what wildlife is out there and see what kind of opportunities for, again, talking about wildlife corridors and what those opportunities are outside of the project area. But yes, all of that is definitely in the works. So, but as Aaron had said, we are in the early stages, but those cameras are set up. So we are tracking that information.
Awesome. Thank you, Candace.
Mm-hmm.
Another question that came up from Martin, will hedgerows be planted along the perimeter?
I think that's definitely an option. I know we discussed that with some neighbors when we were driving on one of their vineyard roads. So I think that is definitely something we can look into as an
Yeah,
option.
so, with a planning project like this, we don't know what we don't know yet in engaging with the landowners. So, for instance, we don't even know exactly where the footprint of the project is because we may actually expand it even a little bit further into people's property. It kind of depends on their interests. And so, that's why one of the key constituencies is the landowners themselves during the planning process. And when you work with multiple different landowners, it's a complicate. It gets more and more complicated just because there's more people in the room, as it were. But I think there's just a lot of excitement about this project from all the landowners. They all signed on to it really early on. There are, pretty major vineyards right around the project periphery. So definitely on our mind is this idea of how do we create kind of a buffer between them for various reasons. One is, if we have public access, they may not want people just venturing from our property to their property. Um, Part of it, of course, is just a visual block and potential to enhance habitat, reduce erosion. Um, yeah, there's lots of benefits here, and that's certainly one thing we're going to explore. And Martin, I know with the beekeepers, we're interested in getting your guys' input on how we can utilize those sorts of methods, not only for the restoration purposes, but also potentially for education. Because if you create these education zones where there might be like a certain area that has a particular function ecologically, but that's a place for like a particular type of learning as well. And so that's another thing to be thinking about as we're doing the design work. How do we integrate it as much as possible, restoration goals, but also these other goals like education, community engagement.
Thanks for sharing, Lucas. That was it for our questions in the chat. We have quite a bit of time left, so if anyone has anything else they'd like to ask our project team, feel free to throw that in there. We'll give it a few minutes, see if anyone has some questions they'd like to elevate. All
And
right.
Annie, maybe I can ask a question, which is how can folks fill out this comment card? Where do they go?
Absolutely. Thanks, Lucas. So you can visit the website that is on your screen. And about midway through the page will be a link for both an English and a Spanish version of the comment form. Um, it will also, as Mo mentioned earlier, have a recording of this webinar. We expect both of those items to go live around noon tomorrow. So you won't find that tonight, but you should be able to find that early tomorrow. And again, we'll be accepting comments through this format until June 26th.
For sharing, Annie. There
And
is
I
another.
want to encourage folks who've joined, if you are part of networks or groups that may also want to contribute, to send them that information when it goes live, because, frankly, the more input we can get, kind of the better for the design approach with this whole project, and the better we can serve the community. So if you're part of the Beekeepers Association or any sort of network, it's helpful to get the word out. And if there's also opportunities that you want to share about, ability for us to show up and perhaps present on this um, to a different group, that's also helpful to know.
And I just wanted to add on to what Lucas said. So this is an opportunity to really kind of start helping us define the vision of the property, giving your ideas, your big ideas, whatever concerns you might have. So this feedback will directly impact the development of, will influence the development of the alternatives that Aaron mentioned earlier.
He wasn't kidding when he said there was homework, my friends. He wasn't kidding. A few more questions from the chat. The first is, are we looking for input on native plants appropriate to the area?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's any kind of input like that is welcome.
And then to follow up, a question from Brendan. Curious how you might consider monitoring groundwater levels as well as water quality across the project area.
I can answer one part of that potentially. As far as the groundwater levels go, it kind of plays into the previous question about the native plants too. Of course, we definitely would like input on the native plants, but as far as what plants will actually go in the ground, understanding as we go through the steps of data collection, what the groundwater, what levels of salinity are actually in the ground, where during the wet and the dry season, what is happening underground. And there are some specific tools out there that do just that. And so those are definitely things that I'm looking into. And, we're also in this process trying to understand, in the process of sea level rise and marsh migration, we have to think too about plants that are going to be able to adapt to that over time. So it starts to get a little bit more complex, but again, anything that we can start to gather and learn about the site is just going to help us better suited for when we get to that restoration step. And part of that too is understanding what those final preferred design will be, because that will also determine what plants are going to go where. So a lot to consider, but more to come.
And I can add on to that too, Candace.
Mm-hmm.
We have a couple great opportunities at the site in terms of groundwater and understanding the current levels. There is a well that's on site on the RCD property. There's also additionally a well on the CDFW property. And so that gives us access to easily be able to understand what those existing groundwater levels are, as well as perhaps looking at some, historic records from when those wells were originally drilled. And then additionally, the Napa RCD has been operating a stream gauge on site for a very long time. And so they have a long record of some of the stream flow with associated, I think there's a little bit of historic water quality data there. that infrastructure is being updated as part of this project. And so an enhanced stream monitoring system to understand stream flows coming into the project site. And then an additional gauge is being installed at the downstream end near the railroad tracks. And that station, in addition to monitoring flow, will also have water quality sensors. And so we'll be able to see different water quality parameters and have a consistent record coming up here as part of this project and the planning process.
Thank you both. At the mention of CDFW, there is a question asking, how would we describe Napa RCD's relationship with CDFW in the Huichica Creek project? Would we consider CDFW a partner, a regulator, or both?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll jump in on this one because technically they're the landowner for about half of the project footprint, and then they are a regulator, a permitting entity, but we're working with different staff for those different purposes. So there's kind of their preserve management staff. So there's people actually operating their lands. And from the kind of project partnership perspective and design perspective, we're working with those folks. But then they do have a nexus in permitting. So there's a different cohort that we work with at CDFW on that part, and that's through the BRIT process. So again, as was kind of mentioned earlier, there's this kind of permit streamlining process that we're utilizing for this. All Bayside projects are able to utilize this program, and it's actually a requirement of the funding source that we're using in part for this to use that process. So hopefully, we've just started that process, so it's real early days. But hopefully, from a permitting standpoint, CDFW will be collaborative. And the whole point of using this BRIT process, from my perspective, one of the core benefits is you're really kind of asked to bring in all the regulators from the very beginning. So all the regulators, even if they're not a landowner in this site, can actually influence your designs early on and kind of unearth some of the difficult questions about what could be approved from an environmental compliance standpoint. And sometimes there are tensions between what the permitting agencies are kind of after. So, you have to work through those things even amongst those regulators. So it will be, a process to go through that, but we're taking a very collaborative approach. That would be our tendency even regardless of this permit streamlining approach. But the permit streamlining approach just kind of builds it in even better, which is good. CDFW, like a lot of public landowners, struggles with resourcing the management of the property. So one of the benefits we think in collaborating is we're kind of helping them do perhaps a little bit more and perhaps take things a little bit further than they could on their own by bringing different funding sources to the table, really connecting them and their land to the public better, raising awareness about these public lands and their value to the community. So that's why it's important to have you all involved. You're not only kind of giving input, but you're actually helping to spread the word and the excitement. And that kind of adds, more energy into doing these kinds of projects.
Thank Lucas. There is one other question, I think, in regards to the comments that you were making earlier about sharing this work with folks' networks. The question is from Martin. Are there any specific groups or organizations that we're still looking to reach out to about this project?
I mean, we're open to suggestions, I would say. We are getting invited to different groups, like some of the agricultural industry groups. The Napa County Habitat Coalition meeting will be coming in I'll be going in, I don't know, a couple weeks. I would say probably this is always the kind of, golden opportunity, but who are some of the constituencies that would be great to get into this world who aren't already the early thinkers and advocates? I think all the folks who joined this webinar, you all are already kind of plugged in and are really, keen on these issues, pay attention. To build the coalition around this sort of work, even beyond this property, it's good to think about who are some of the other constituencies that would be good to pull in. And I think because there's a public access and kind of education community engagement component here, we could think a little bit more broadly, because this isn't just restoration and walk away and it's kind of protected and fenced off. This is restoration and trying to provide a space for ongoing learning and volunteerism and all these things. So this is kind of a nice project to use as a vehicle for engaging different types of groups. So we're very open to thinking about that. We sometimes have our blinders on as RCD because we're connected to certain groups or get invited to certain places, and we may not even know where else we might go, to spread the word. So definitely give us input on that as you think about it.
Thanks, Lucas. And again, we've reached the end of our questions in the chat. Well, it looks like we've got one more. So from Frank, I've heard that the Land Trust of Napa County received mitigation funding for California red-legged frog habitat / monitoring in South Napa. Have you picked their brains on the idea of how the site can benefit these threatened frog species?
Yeah, I can jump in. I know about this project. It's actually kind of cool because the Land Trust in Napa County actually did, I think, the biggest red-legged frog habitat project in the state, in Napa County. And I think it's actually not in the lowlands. It's actually a bit in the uplands, which is a little unusual for a red-legged frog project. Um, yeah, I think this site offers some potential for red-legged frog habitat restoration. They have specific needs. They like ponds that dry up and, so they're seasonal. So there's kind of design considerations to think about. The Land Trust is certainly kind of one of our close partners, and the biologists that they work with um, is somebody that we know about, and we definitely are going to be kind of chatting about those things. But this is kind of where the design process comes into play, where you could design around one species, sometimes in a way that actually kind of reduces the potential for another species to utilize the site. So there's actually decisions that we will need to make about what rare, threatened, and endangered species we are trying to prioritize. And we started this project from a salmon perspective, and then we broadened it from really like a landscape perspective. And we're talking about whole ecosystems and plant communities and birds and other species. So there's still a lot to unpack from just a restoration goals perspective as to what are we really designing around and some of these features, habitat features. There's going to be, we're going to have to get into the weeds on these things. So red-legged frog is one, but nesting birds and the types of nesting opportunities for them. You can design to enhance certain habitat for certain species, but for other species that maybe want more of a grassland area for nesting, they may not be benefited. So these are the sorts of things we're going to have to go through, and getting input even on those things is helpful.
Thanks, Lucas. Um, is there a short info packet that could be provided to groups that we could share with other groups? And that's coming from Martin with the Bee Association.
We're kind of using the website for that, but if it would be helpful maybe to create like a little PDF info sheet or something, that'd be easy to do. We were just thinking the website is kind of the place that will constantly be updating, and we'll have like recordings of things. There will be, like even this PowerPoint is going to become a resource, like a PDF there. So there should be like lots of materials there. But if there's another type of like maybe a one page or a two-pager kind of thing that you think would be helpful, we could definitely think about that and put that together.
The webpage will also have an updated frequently asked questions and answers section that can also be referenced. So we are using your questions here tonight to create that. So I do think, having the website be our point of contact to make sure everything is accurate and timely is the path we're headed right now.
Thanks, Annie. Any final questions from the group? Still have a little bit of time to dig into the good stuff. Giving folks another minute in case you're typing a really long one. Which we welcome. Okay. Doesn't look like there's anything else from the group. So thank you all so much for joining us this evening, for your thoughtful questions and your participation. We really appreciate your interest in the restoration of Huichica Creek, building climate resilience in Napa Valley, looking at nature-based solutions that can help address all of these different risks and improve habitat. So yeah, thank you for being here. As a reminder, a recording of this webinar, as Annie stated and Lucas stated, will be available on the Napa RCD website and more specifically on the Huichica Creek Preserve webpage. If you have any additional questions after tonight's presentation, please feel free to reach out to our team. Erin's email is on the main screen right now, but our contact information is available on the Huichica Creek webpage. And if you reach out to Aaron, he can connect you with the right person to answer your question. And aside from that, we just thank you for your time and your engagement, and we hope that you have a wonderful evening. I might stick around for the next few minutes, so if anyone would like to stick around after this presentation has ended to ask a question or two, feel free. And otherwise, we hope everyone has a great night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.